about 4:30. Everyone's been so excited to bring you all together and share their work. And it was hard to get you all away from the bar, which is great. So keep, refilling your drinks. Feel free to get up, stretch, move around, make yourselves comfortable. My name's Sally Sweat. I'm the artistic director here at Eyebeam. Before we get started, I just want to share a bit of housekeeping information. So as you can see, we have some cameras around us. We're live streaming tonight for archival purposes and also to increase access to our program. And our wonderful photographer, Christine, will be roaming about as well. So that being said, if you don't want to be on camera, you can just let myself or any of my wonderful colleagues know. If any Eyebeam folks can just raise their hands so you know if you don't want to be on camera. Or just tell Christine. Just give us a shout. Also, all gender restrooms are located behind me and down the hall to your left. We have cart transcription tonight as well. That's to increase access to this event. And as I said before, please don't hesitate to get up, grab some water, more wine throughout the event as well. So, you're all here to celebrate the culmination of our 2019 residency program and the 5 amazing individuals who you'll be hearing from shortly. But first, I just thought it might be helpful to take a step back a bit and briefly share some notes from our original open call on the theme of access, as I think it provides some important framework for tonight. So back in spring 2018, we released our open call for 2019, where we asked about 350 applicants how art and technology challenge dominant notions of access and how together we can shape a more equitable future. We are interested in notions of access through a multitude of lenses, including but not limited to access to physical space, access to information, access as it relates to disability, gender, race, socioeconomic positions, sexual orientations, as well as ecosystems and environmental access. We asked, among other central questions, how can artist-initiated projects and new technologies disrupt and refigure legislated and often constricted measures of access? How does access construct relationships with the world and with each other? And those are just a couple of the questions that we asked our applicants to consider. So it's been really incredible this last year working with these residents who have been grappling with these questions in really brilliant, really remarkably different ways. So I can't wait for you to hear from our 4 Access residents, LaJuné McMillian, Shannon Finnegan, Yo-Yo Lin, the movers and shakers, who will be speaking very shortly. And lastly, before I turn the mic over to LaJuné, who will be speaking first, I want to share my most sincere gratitude for the team of total rock stars here at Eyebeam, who put so much hard work, care, and of course fun into running the program and everything else we do. So big thanks to the team, Joanna, Jay, Maddie, Yidan, Marissa, Lola, Munira, interns past and present. Special shout out to guest Sarah O'Connell, who ran the residency until just a couple months ago. Welcome, Sarah. And of course, our executive director, Roddy Shaw. So, LaJuné, the mic is yours.
Hello everyone, my name is LaJuné McMillian, and I'm a new media artist working at the intersection of performance and technology. I've worked along many different mediums, including motion capture technologies, physical computing, and extended reality, which is an umbrella term for augmented, virtual, and mixed reality tools. And my project here is the Black Movement Project. And the Black Movement Project is an online database of Black character base models and Black motion capture data. And essentially, I started this project because existing motion capture libraries don't really capture different movements that Black people would do. So this is a character that I created in Daz doing a hip hop dance in an existing motion capture library. And if you can just see, this is not hip hop dancing. And so I decided that I was going to create a space where that wasn't the case, where we could have diverse movements, where we could have a variety of the ways that we move. But during my my first month here at Eyebeam, there was a lawsuit with Fortnite, and Fortnite is a video game created by Epic Games. And with the lawsuits, essentially all of these dances from the Black community, like the Millie Rock or the Carlton dance, were appropriated to be placed into this video game. And the thing about it that's really ridiculous and terrible is not only that these dances were taken, however, that none of the originators of the movements were compensated for their work, and the movements themselves were changed in name. So, for example, the Millie Rock was changed to the Swipe It. And so then that got me to think about all of these different questions. One of them being how we combat the exploitation, erasure, and dilution of Black culture. So all of these things, this isn't new. Black culture has always been exploited. Blackness, Black people have always been exploited. And for me, as a technologist, as someone working in this space, it's really important for me to really think about these things as I'm moving along. But then also, how can we build spaces where our stories are safe, understood, and celebrated? And so I decided that the Black Movement Project was way more than just a tool or a database, but that it was a library for activists, performers, and artists to create diverse projects, but also a space to research how and why we move, and an archive of our existence. And so my project is very inspired by Catherine Dunham's Movement Library. Catherine Dunham was an anthropologist, a dancer, a choreographer, an author, an educator, and so much more. And she, throughout the 1930s, traveled throughout the Caribbean, writing and taking video of Black movement. And so with that, she was also able to take those movements and incorporate them into her performances. She also created the Dunham technique, and she transformed the world of modern dance with her movements. So, with that said, the Black Movement Project has expanded into not only a space to catalog movement, but also a space to build community through performances, workshops, conversations, and toolmaking. So for the performative aspect, I worked with two performers named Nala Duma and Ronaldo Maurice, and this is the narrative component of the project, where I had them both wear motion capture suits, as well as I did interviews with them and incorporated that into a performance piece that allowed people to see like a real motion capture experience. So I created live visuals. So the next slide is the. Oh, so yeah, I used the perception neuron suit and Unreal Engine, and essentially for 5 to 10 minutes, people were able to hear their not only music that represented each artist, but also their movement journeys as well. Here's a snippet. So that was the first performance, just a snippet. Oh, thank you. But from here, after doing this performance, I realized that I needed to go through the journey of myself, of redefining and rediscovering my own movement practice. So I grew up figure skating, and midway through being here at Eyebeam, I was able to connect with Brown Body, which is an all-African-American ice theater company in Minneapolis. And from there, I went to Minneapolis for a month, basically just trying to digest and just rework my own relationship to the ice, which is a predominantly white space. And then also while I was here, I was able to create a series of workshops and with the term understanding, transforming, and preserving Black movement in digital spaces. And within this workshop, what's really special is that we don't only go through the digital tools that one might use to create motion capture and extended reality projects, but we also challenge the different tools that we're using. And so if you can see here, this is DAZ, a character building software, and within a lot of these softwares, the base character is often seen as a white, able-bodied, thin character. And what does it mean to challenge that? And what does it mean to create tools that are beyond that? But then also, I decided to start having conversations with people who are leading within their own fields. And so I actually had the first conversation last week with Amy Meredith Cox, who is a dance anthropologist and professor at Yale, as well as Yusef Cole, who's a writer and animator. And so that conversation was really amazing, hearing their thoughts on the Black Movement Project. And also, Yusef Cole was a person who created this fantastic article on Fortnite and the appropriation of the dances, so I encourage you to check that out. But that leads me to my last slide. Black Movement Project is a movement. It's not only just an archive, it's not only just a set of digital tools, but it's a movement to allow us to celebrate, to honor, and to encourage one another to represent Black movements and ourselves in an ethical way. Thank you. And next up, Shannon Finnegan.
Hi, everyone. Hi, I'm Shannon Finnegan. I identify as someone who's disabled, and I'm an artist, and a lot of the work that I've done has been about access, and about how access as related to disability is often approached in a very compliance-oriented framework. People are kind of like, I don't want to just check a box, kind of get it over with, do the minimum effort so that they don't get in trouble. And so a lot of my work has been about thinking how we can approach access in ways that are more creative, more generative, that really center disability culture. And so part of that is really thinking through, like, how do we create spaces that disabled people not only can access, but actually want to access. And so a lot of the work that I've done has been in physical space. I have a physical disability, so I've been working on a series of benches. I also have an ongoing project called Anti-Stairs Club Lounge that gathers people who share an aversion to stairs in different spaces for different reasons. So when I came to Eyebeam, I was thinking a lot about how some of that thinking that I had done in physical space might translate into digital spaces, and thinking about digital accessibility. And so I've been working on this project called Alt Text as Poetry. I have a collaborator on this project, Bojana Kokliat. Bojana is also a disabled artist, currently a Fulbright Fellow, so she is currently in the Czech Republic, but she has studied disability studies, has worked in access, and is also an artist, and has been an amazing collaborator with me on this project.
So before we kind of jump in, just to give a sense of what alt text is, in case anyone is unfamiliar. So this is kind of an official definition from WebAIM, which is an organization that supports web accessibility. So alt text is actually used for a couple different things, but just to focus in on kind of the access use. Alt text is read by screen readers in place of images, allowing the content and function of the image to be accessible to those with visual or certain cognitive disabilities. So a screen reader is a piece of software that basically reads out content from a digital display. So for example, on a web page, the screen reader might read out the navigation bar, the title, the first paragraph, the second paragraph, but the screen reader can't read an image, and so it knows to access this piece of information that's associated with the image in the code that's called alt text. So that piece of information, the alt text, describes the image, gives access to the information being communicated in that image. So if you are not a web developer or a screen reader user, you probably interact with alt text through an upload field when you're adding content to the internet. So that might be on Twitter, it might be on Instagram, Facebook, through a content management system like WordPress, Squarespace. So we on social media platforms, for example, we as users are responsible for making our own content accessible. So as we're adding the image, we have the opportunity to describe it and add to the accessibility of that platform. And so, like a lot of things related to access, alt text has often been ignored, or people kind of don't know about it, it's not on their radar, or it's been approached in this very dry and perfunctory tone. And I think coming from kind of my background as an artist, I was really interested in how you translate visual information into text. Like, that's actually a really interesting and complicated question to think through. And so Bojana and I have been working with this question, which is, what can alt text learn from poetry? So there's already been all this thinking done in the world of poetry, and a lot of it is applicable to this writing practice around accessibility alt text. And so some of the things that we've been thinking about in particular are this idea of attention to language. So just being really attuned to the tone we're using, the perspective, are we using jargon, are we using slang? Is the tone of the writing aligned with the tone of the image? Is it in contrast with the tone of the image? Just by kind of focusing in on those things, we really shift the process. The next is the idea of word economy. So poetry has a lot to teach us about being really expressive while also being pretty brief. There are times for really long and lavish descriptions, but most of the time with alt text, we're thinking about like 1 to 3 sentences, depending on the complexity of the image. So how can we keep that expressiveness while being really kind of careful and judicious with our words? And then the third one is this idea of an experimental approach. We have a lot to learn from poetry about taking a kind of more playful and exploratory approach to this writing practice, and really kind of starting to build out different strategies that we can bring to doing this writing. And I always like to clarify, it's not experimentation for the sake of experimentation, where access is always really at the core. We're interested in kind of experimenting and iterating towards better and more nuanced access. So Bojana and I developed this workshop that introduces people to alt text, talks about why we think it's helpful to think about alt text as a type of poetry, surfaces some of the kind of key issues that we feel like come up often when translating images into text. And then the core of the workshop is giving people a chance to write image descriptions, to write alt text, and really talk about that process and kind of learn from each other. And so we've done this workshop about 20 times over the past 11 months, mostly at arts organizations in the city, but also at kind of all sorts of different places. And the goal of the workshop is really, like, we are not coming in as experts. We think of this as an art project. It's really about kind of creating the space for people to talk about this and learn from each other, rather than us coming in and kind of saying, like, this is how you do it. So what's coming up next for this project is that we're making a workbook. So we're doing a kind of self-guided version of the workshop. So from the comfort of your own home, you'll be able to kind of practice writing alt text. We're working on this project that we're calling Alt Text Study Club, which will be a resource that gathers examples of alt text and kind of starts to build a database of some of those strategies or approaches that we could bring to describing images. And then farther out into 2020, we're thinking through an exhibition project that will think about engaging with art non-visually. And so just to end, I wanted to share one of my favorite examples of alt text. This is something that I found early on as I was starting to think about this project. This was not written by someone who went to the workshop, but I think is a really good example of the potential of alt text. So this is from the Death Valley National Park Service Instagram account, and the description of this image is twisted wood branches in the foreground with an arc of stars in the sky above a dark, distant mountain. Thank you so much. Next up we have Yo-Yo Lin.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. My name is Yo-Yo Lin. I'm an interdisciplinary media artist, and I'm trying to live more in my body. So I've been developing this toolkit called Modes of Embodiment. I'm developing methodologies and doing research around processing and reclaiming chronic health trauma. And I'm doing this in a few different ways, but I wanted to preface this thinking about how we can reconsider how the ill and disabled body-mind can be an unprecedented space for generative aesthetics, emotional depth, and generosity. So I'm basically doing the toolkit in 3 different components this year. First is soft data tracking. The second is audio-visual processing. And the third is movement practice and space holding. And we'll go into more detail with each one. So with the Resilience Journal, this is a tool I developed that is seeking to visualize the overlooked soft data in our lives. Often living with a chronic illness, it often feels that I'm confronting my illness mainly through hard medical data, and I wanted to combat that in creating this space for myself. So this is a spread from my personal Resilience Journal, and this is the month of February. On the left are notes from each day, and on the right is a circle data visualization of what happens each day. And for this data visualization, I was asking myself, what are the different ways that my illness presents itself in daily life? So I started tracking 7 different dimensions. So on the first outer loop is felt it, which is chronic pain. A lot of the symptoms I experience is in chronic pain, but I realized that chronic pain exists not just physiologically, but also psychologically. Logistical problems, body image, social pressures, going to the doctor. This morning I was like, oh, I should change going to the doctor to giving care to myself. And then future visions, how I'm enacting in my present the future that I want to live in. Past, which is whenever past memories and past traumas come up. So this has been a very ritualistic process for me. Really wanting to explore just the everyday lived experience of chronic illness. And I've been doing this pretty much every day. And I wanted to look at these dimensions more because I often felt that our bodies are so medicalized that we don't often get to explore illness or trauma in a way that isn't from that perspective. But also thinking about how acknowledging things like illness and trauma is often something that we don't allow ourselves to do, especially if we're from a more marginalized immigrant community. So it's like even putting a name to it is just so scary for people. And I also wanted to put this into context, thinking about how this disability scholar, Colin Cameron, writes about this thing called the disabling gaze. And the disabling gaze is something that is very predominant in society in which disabled and ill people are expected and often required to experience their own embodiment negatively. And that's real. And I was wondering how I can hold space for this part of myself in a way that wasn't coming from a place that was like, I need to struggle against this, I need to fix this, but just letting it be. So data tracking was a way to do that. So on December 4th, we're releasing the journal here at Eyebeam. So come on down, grab a copy. And here's some examples of different people writing about it on Instagram. People would just DM me and send me things they've done, which has been amazing. And I wanted to move forward into another mode of embodiment. So I've been exploring how illness can also be sound. I've been looking at, actually started here, just in this space right now, where I was doing a lot of stretches and moving around because I was feeling a lot of chronic pain. And a lot of the stretches and movements that I do produce a lot of popping and cracking sounds. So I was wondering if we can sample these sounds and synthesize them into music. So over here, you'll see my friend Micah is taking a feed of live body sounds coming from various parts of my body that hold lots of different popping and cracking sounds, and then synthesizing them into music. And then I've also been working with my choreographer, dancer friend, Laura Marston, over there, who has been teaching me how to essentially see my body as a site for creative expression. So here's a little clip of that performance. Restorative movement and gestures of care can be a dance practice. And I'm also, from the beginning, I've been an animator and a media artist, so I'm also really interested in seeing how visually my body can be remixed through video. And moving forward, we've been developing a workshop because I've been realizing that there isn't really a space to explore illness and disability as a site for creative expression in movement. So we've been working together at Movement Research, Laura Marston and I, in developing a workshop series entitled Modes of Embodiment, Expressive Toolkit for Chronically Ill and Disabled Bodies. And this is one of our workshops. And we like to center access as part of the practice and we work with the institution in bringing that access forward. And in this workshop, we work towards dismantling ableist notions of skill and rigor. Anyone is welcome to come, no matter where you are in your disability status and no matter where you are in your movement practice. Anyone who's curious about movement is welcome. And we do a variety of different modalities. One of them is authentic movement and the practice of witnessing each other through movement. I love this one. And yeah, considering the shapes that our unique body minds can create, thinking about different kinds of ways of looking at our medical files, like seeing our medical files as movement scores, creating networks of interdependence through just being in space and movement together. And on November 10th, we have a public version of this workshop, so I welcome anyone who's curious about movement to come. And I wanted to leave you with this last slide, this quote I overheard, which is, healing is not a way to return to a past state, but a process of becoming. So thank you so much. And up next, we got movers and shakers.
All right, it's working? All right, peace and blessings. My name is Glenn.
I'm Idris.
And we are Movers and Shakers. Movers and Shakers is a collective of artists, activists, educators, and technologists focused on using augmented reality as a tool to highlight the narratives of the oppressed. So before I move forward, just quick raise of hands if you're familiar with augmented reality or if you've used it before. All right, better than most rooms. Cool. So for those of you who are unfamiliar, augmented reality is a medium in which the digital world is superimposed by the physical world through a lens. So that lens can be anything from glasses to a headset to a smartphone. And so popular applications of augmented reality include viral game Pokemon Go. Another example is the Snapchat or Instagram filters where you hold your phone up and maybe your face turns to a dog or something cool happens. And in terms of access specifically, our work revolves around using art and technology in order to democratize the access to underrepresented narratives in ways that have not been done. And so in the United States, our classrooms, our public spaces, our monuments, and our cultural institutions, they tend to focus on the financial gains of the oppressors and they gloss over the pain of the oppressed. Yes. So when I was in first grade, I specifically remember my teacher telling us that George Washington was nice to his slaves. Yeah, and I remember that one of the activities we had to do is that we had to color Christopher Columbus's boats, the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria, but our teacher never covered the fact that there were Taino slaves at the bottom of those boats. And she certainly neglected to mention the fact that Columbus's actions catalyzed a genocide of 80 to 100 million indigenous people across 2 continents.
And so it's really these stories from the past that we have used to really guide our work moving forward. And so over this last year, Eyebeam has really allowed us the time, the space, the freedom, and yes, the money to be able to really delve deep into our practice and figuring out what areas we can use our medium, augmented reality, to affect the most change. And so the 3 areas that we came across that we can use our art to really make a tangible impact are education, public spaces, and cultural institutions. And so in terms of education, before Movers and Shakers, I worked as a computer science educator at Google Code Next, which was a program that developed culturally engaging and enriching computer science curriculum for high school students around New York City. And the goal was to really cultivate the next generation of Black and Latinx tech leaders. And really the most rewarding part of this experience was being able to teach these high school kids everything from coding and design to computational art and engineering, and really see themselves, allow themselves to see them in the technologies and really the future of technology. Because growing up, going to school, I didn't really see computer science as an option for me. I didn't see it as engaging. I didn't see the possibilities. It wasn't until I had the privilege to be exposed to such things, and that's when it clicked for me. And so, as for movers and shakers moving forward, we really want to get the technologies of tomorrow into the hands of the communities who usually get it last, because we want these communities to build their own futures. Right now, their futures are being built without them in mind, and so we need to curb that and really pave a path for the youth behind us.
Amen. So earlier this year, we won the Verizon 5G EdTech Challenge. It was a national open call for creative uses of 5G technology in the classroom. And so with the support of Verizon, we were able to hire a talented team, and our partner Micah, who's back there, joined us full time. And so through the Verizon Project Accelerator, we had the opportunity to work with talented technologists, with teachers, with students, and with writers to create Unsung. And so Unsung is a multiplayer augmented reality learning experience that focuses on 4 women of color who've used their voices to fight for social change.
And so the platform that we built for Unsung really provides a completely new and unique way to position narratives in augmented reality. So let's say we're in a classroom, we're all in a classroom here, and so we're all 6th to 8th grade English students, and we would receive a workbook, and those workbooks would align with each figure that we're highlighting, and along with those students we'll be able to also answer multiple choice questions in the app. Now the correct answers to those questions would unlock what you see here, which is our augmented reality story box. And this story box, there's one for each figure, and this story box really provides a visual and interactive element for the kids to explore the history of each of these figures. And so the amazing part about this is that we're really meeting kids where they're at with their media intake. At home and with their friends, they're really used to engaging with things very visually and very interactively, like video games, social media, TV, etc. So with this, we really can take historical educational content, and on top of that content that's not really taught at schools right now, and we can bring it to them in a similarly engaging and visual manner and really increase their engagement in what they're actually learning.
Okay, so right now we're specifically focused on English classes, and that's intentional. Now the reality is that doing the work and going through the bureaucratic process of changing historical curricula, it's above us. And it's a battle that we're not properly equipped to engage in as of now. But one of the key insights that we've received through our user interviews with teachers and students came from the fact that our augmented reality story box and our storytelling framework is pretty flexible. And so teachers from various disciplines have told us that we can implement our story boxes in their classrooms right now. And so in terms of next steps for us, Verizon has given us another round of funding to implement Unsung at scale. And so we're going to be releasing this in 40 schools nationwide in September of 2020 and in 100 schools by September of 2021. We're excited too. And so what's exciting about Unsung is that the digital assets that are available will be useful and instrumental in our fight to reimagine and to reclaim public spaces. We're talking about reframing conversations in terms of who is praised and why they're praised. So nationwide, there are more than 5,100 statues of different people that are standing. Out of that 5,100, there are 718 Confederate monuments that would have owned people like Idris, myself, and many of you in the audience. And there's 394 women. No, I got you. So there's 5,100 monuments of people. There are 718 Confederate monuments, and there are 394 statues of women. Make sure you know that's crazy. So, what was that? 394 women. Yeah. So,
Unsung public school.
oh yeah. So anyway, so that's a huge problem, right? It's like even in 2019, just challenging the notion of the fact that our public spaces are dominated by male, Eurocentric, and largely white supremacist narratives it creates tension. And if you look at, in 2017, I went down to Charlottesville, Virginia, and I counter-protested the Nazis and the Klansmen that went out of their way to preserve their own version of history. You could see what they're willing to do and the lengths they're willing to go to preserve these false narratives. And so in New York City, we engaged in a campaign to advocate for the removal of the statue of Christopher Columbus at Columbus Circle. And yeah, we said our words, so y'all want to join me, talk. But anyway, so the point is, we did creative demonstrations using our augmented reality technology to host teach-ins in public spaces throughout New York City. I ran the New York City Marathon in Chains to raise awareness, and we worked with a slew of grassroots organizations that were trying to pursue the same objective. But the problem is that politics is politics, and Mayor de Blasio refused to remove the statue. As you know, it still stands today. And so that's when we realized that we have to just rewrite the rules ourselves. And so with augmented reality, we figured something out. So it's, obviously politically contentious to remove statues, and it's prohibitively expensive to address the discrepancy that I was talking about before. It's literally years in the making. But with AR, we can write the rules. And so it's scalable. We can make hundreds of AR monuments for the price of one traditional statue. We can make them any size. We can put them anywhere. We can do it with permission. We can do it without permission. And so that's what we're trying to do. And so we're building out a catalog of different women, people of color, the LGBTQIA+ community, and our goal is to start off in New York City and ultimately scale this out and implement this nationwide. And so in terms of our next steps, we just got 20 monuments funded, and we are going to launch them for Black History Month, and then with the ultimate goal of in the spring, we're gonna start doing walking tours. And then over time, as we're building out this catalog, we also want to implement our story boxes. And so the idea of the story boxes is that you can remove the academic component, you can put them in public spaces, and for the first time, communities of color will be able to engage with narratives that resonate with us.
And you can clap. And so the final part of our work for the year is our work with cultural institutions. And so our goal there was to really change the way that cultural institutions tell stories and also change the way that they interact with the public, but also which areas of the public they're actually interacting with. And so over the past few months, we've created a prototype with the Museum of Contemporary Art of Detroit, and that prototype would serve as a way to change up how digital media is shown in certain institutions, but our vision for it is really to create a two-way street of engagement between a cultural institution and the communities outside of it. Because we think AR provides the perfect tool to kind of break the conversations and the content that's being shown inside the four walls of the institution. We want to kind of bring that out and expand that. And so the app would serve inside the institution as a way for us to get content that's not normally shown, like digital content and etc., and bring that into that space with AR. But also we wanted to bring kind of statues, we wanted to bring sculptures, paintings that are only kept in the museums, and we want to use AR to bring that out into the public space, whether that's through murals, whether that's through geolocation AR experiences, or whether that's through 3D scans of certain artwork that we're doing. And so that is we want to just really make museums and make gallery spaces accessible for the general public, not what they are right now.
And so long term, our goal is to use augmented reality technology as a tool to reframe antiquated narratives, to educate the youth, and to empower grassroots organizations to have their own teach-ins in their own communities, so that finally, the communities that typically get it last, we gotta be first in line. Thank you.
Great job. And I know everyone's super eager to ask questions, but I'm gonna start and ask you each a question. LaJuné, let's start with you. So you spoke briefly about how your conceptual thinking around the Black Movement Project has shifted from the formation of a more online database to really building a community space. And I love thinking about it as a library because it's such a wonderful way of thinking about what you're really trying to do. So I'm wondering if you could just talk a bit more about the significance of this shift in your work over the last year, and how you're going about building community and collaborative research in your process.
So, when I first started the project, I had realized that a lot of the people who are currently in the space using the tools like the current motion capture libraries and character-based model applications, I knew that that didn't reflect the people that I wanted to use those tools. And so then I realized that because of that, I was going to have to build out a space where that wouldn't be the case. At first I thought that the library would actually be open source, but I realized that that just doesn't make sense at all, mainly because I wanted to make sure that I was creating a space where the performance artists were protected. So I decided that when you shift to a more community-based space and a community-based project, you can bring in people that normally wouldn't engage with these tools and give them a space to see what's currently available, but also give them a space to challenge the spaces that are available now currently as well. So turning it into a library, one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot lately as well is also the future of a library space and how I could transform that to a space that could better represent this project. So yeah, I believe that when you build a community, you can build better tools. I believe that when you can build a community space, you can create a space where people are challenging the current systems. And yeah, I think that that's pretty much.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Shannon, we'll
Oh, we're
just
just
go
going down the line.
We'll go down the line. So I remember after you developed the Alt Text as Poetry workshop, you came to us and you said, I really want to do this in as many places as possible. Can you help me? And so we reached out to a number of organizations, and surprise, everyone said yes. They wanted the workshop. So, about 20 organizations you said, and I know that each kind of experience obviously has different participants coming from different perspectives and varying levels of familiarity with alt text. I'm just really curious to hear a little bit more about how this process has been cumulative, how each one kind of contributes to your larger body of research, and also what have been some of the biggest challenges that have come up in the description process with individuals, and how has this sort of shaped the workshop moving forward?
Okay, yeah, a lot in that question. I think both Bojana and I came into this project as non-experts, as artists. Bojana is someone who identifies as low vision, so she's engaging with description a lot, so she had kind of that expertise coming into the project. But I think both of us felt like we're always learning and continue to always learn, and that's been something, even kind of writing the workbook, thinking about how to kind of stop a moment in time in our thinking while also giving space for the fact that things are changing. One small example of that is I think I felt really excited going into the project about this idea of artists describing their own work, partially because I think it's really interesting when access isn't kind of this Band-Aid that's put on at the end of a project, that it's kind of conceived of from the beginning and integrated creatively throughout a project. And so, we were kind of talking about that and excited about that, and we went to one workshop where there was someone who was blind who was I hate artist-generated descriptions. Really felt like that created a type of description that was about the artist's intent, but not actually about what the experience of the work was. And so I think that just moments like that where understanding there really isn't one right approach to writing an image description. And so it's important to just understand kind of pros and cons of different strategies. And there's there's huge outstanding questions that we have that it's really fun to bring people into this work in order to hear what they have to say about it. But each of the exercises is kind of focused around a specific area of description. So one is about subjectivity and audience, so thinking about who you are as a describer, what knowledge and context you bring to description, and also who you're describing for, what you imagine they know, what they might be interested in. One is about kind of length and priority, so like for a specific image, like how much description is needed, what information should come first, what information should come later. And one is about describing people in the ways that identity and representation come up in description, and kind of there are lots of different approaches to that, whether it's like asking people to self-describe, doing kind of collaborative descriptions, creating space in the description for saying that you're not sure, or that you're guessing, or you're making an interpretation. But yeah, there's just really, there's so many interesting things that come up, and it's been so exciting to just get to talk about it with different people and have kind of their areas of expertise come into this practice.
Thank you. Yo-yo. So first I want to say, it's totally wild hearing from you and just seeing how much your practice has evolved over the last year. It's quite mind-blowing, actually. And to believe that your movement practice, which is totally stunning, it feels so, you know, it's hard to believe that it's a totally new form of expression for you. So I'd love for you to just say a little bit more about this transition, and also how something that's so personal, what it means to kind of work across collaborations, to work with new participants in each workshop, to work with new institutions. Again, a loaded question, but you know, I have to know more.
Yeah, the movement workshop, the movement practice is totally new. I kind of came into Eyebeam like a floating head without a body, and then only experiencing my body in pain. So I kind of was talking to Lara about this, and Lara is a close, we've been friends for like 8 years or more, and I have always been like the person like doing projections while like she's the one dancing, and we were talking, and she was like, you know what would be amazing is if you use yourself as an example of what developing a movement practice could be like for someone with chronic illness. And I was like, that's wild. Like, I don't know how I want to do that. Like, I don't want to put my body on the line. Like, that's a lot of work. And then I like kept thinking more and more, and I was like, like that is like the medium. Like, we're talking about the body, we're talking about illness, we're talking about embodiment. Like, there needs to be a certain level of physicality to this. And yeah, and I do enjoy dancing. So I was thinking about all these things, and Laura and I booked some rehearsal spaces, and like she would just like stare at me while I like do stuff. It was very DIY in that sense, but Laura coming with so much expertise in like dance and personal movement and journeys, and being very mindful about like where to push me and where to let me explore, kind of led me into like a more informed and confident way of exploring movement. And I was just moving like the past Monday and like feeling like really good. And I was like, okay, like maybe I should like push myself more. Like maybe I should like make my this rehearsal like into like a more robust rehearsal where I'm like pushing myself to the limits. And then I was like, wait, why am I thinking that? And I was just realizing that so much of what I do is geared towards like pleasurable movements and movements that give me care, and how maybe just exploring that could be enough for developing a movement practice. And these are all things I already do, so that worked. Or it's working so far. And in terms of institutions, like working with movement research, which is this amazing movement and dance institution, has been incredible. I was, introduced to them by Jay, who used to work there and now works at Eyebeam full time. And yeah, without Jay, I would not have a movement practice in their yeah, like Jay was just like, okay, you should know these people, you should go to these events, and like just email me, and I was like, oh, okay, like, and it was very proactive and like held me accountable in that sense of just like, oh, this is something I need to like keep learning, keep working on, and that was amazing because the people at Movement Research are such a scrappy team, but they do so much, and they do so much like thought and care into how they curate different kinds of classes and movement performances. So working with them has been amazing. Like the past workshop we've been working on, we've been like, the whole space is ADA accessible, but we've been also like making the space accessible beyond just basics. Like we wanted to make the space welcoming. We wanted to make the space like actually geared towards people with chronic illness and disability. So, we always have seats in the space. We always have like different cushions. We have like snacks people could eat who have like, dietary restrictions. And the class runs for 4 hours, which is a long time. But people, show up like an hour late, and that's like totally fun because, transportation and like crib time. So yeah, and like we also, for some reason, always have like an hour and a half afterwards to just like talk and like hang out, which is like never heard of in like a rehearsal space in like dance institutions. You're always just like backing up and like getting all your stuff and like leaving. And like everyone's just like standing around waiting for you to leave. So it's been amazing just like having space and time. And like, yeah, that's so necessary for people who can't move fast, So yeah.
Awesome, thank you.
Thank you.
I have a couple questions for you too, but I'm going to go with the juicier one before we open it up. So with any political or social justice driven agenda, there will always be tensions between staying true to your core values and working with institutions, corporations, media, and other positions of power. And Glenn, I remember early on in one of our early meetings, you asked, I'm slightly rephrasing this for the audience's sake, just kidding. How do you navigate ruffling feathers of folks that you may need to ask favors from later? So now that, so really, navigating that line when you're working with power that often comes with money and other forms of access that you're going to eventually need and want. So now that when you're navigating your this is something that I'm sure so many people in this room contend with, and I've thought about a lot too. So do you have any advice on how to navigate this based on your experience, or do you have any, what are kind of like the biggest challenges that you see in this area?
Do y'all have advice? All right, so it's an ongoing conversation that we have a lot. I'm gonna give a brief anecdote and then I'll make it more broad. So like right now even, like you see with there are a lot of protests in terms of who's in the board of museums and how they're getting funded, and should artists be supported by these museums? Should they put their work in these museums? Like what happens there, right? And like we're also in this space where the social climate is being shifted. Like private prisons just abolished in California. It's a big deal, right? And so like 5 years ago, Mark Zuckerberg writing a check to an institution wouldn't be seen as a big deal. Now, not so much. And like, so what's really important as we need to be agents of change is like understanding A, like what our core values are, and B, also navigating what the future is going to look like, because we want to be the ones paving the path for it. So in terms of one like bedrock thing that we've figured out so far, it's like there's one thing where it's like, look, if you are running for political office and you take checks from ExxonMobil, you're probably not gonna be an advocate of something like the Green New Deal, for example, right? Because there's like a legitimate power dynamic there. But that being said, well, thanks to Eyebeam, but like we got bills to pay too, right?
Sure, of course.
And so one of the things that we've really honed down on in terms of our values is looking at certain institutions that we're engaging with, because no one is perfect. We're still using iPhones, right? How many of y'all are using iPhones? Raise your hand if you use an iPhone, right? So you're supporting child labor in Congo doing that, right? So we're all complicit in the system. But that being said, we're approached by an institution and they have certain terms. You can't talk about this, that, and the third. That's a problem. Versus, in the case of Verizon, for example, we're given space, we're given IP ownership, and we have a lot of agency over what we do and how we move. We can get jiggy with that.
Totally, yeah. Thank you for taking that on. And now we're going to move to audience questions. Should anyone have one? I'll give you one. Okay.
Hi, I'm Rad. I wanted to know if any of y'all have done any work with civic engagement with any governmental agencies, or if you've entertained that option, or to completely run away from it.
Yeah. It's an interesting song and dance, especially given the fact that we are activists. There's a lot of bureaucracy that has to be considered, and at least from my engagement, a lot of the energy that I've received is that as an individual, I'm on board with what you're doing, but because of X, Y, Z power dynamics or this situation, I cannot publicly advocate for you, or you cannot move within our halls of power. However, there are other situations where, for example, Jamani Williams, the New York City public advocate, when we were first trying to get rid of the statue, he was the first councilman to endorse what we were doing. So it all depends, and we're definitely open to it, but once again, the biggest thing is the terms. How can we move? We're not gonna make posters that we say we love Columbus and have that pop up in Augmented Reality. That's not cute.
Sorry.
I haven't directly, but in New York City we have the mayor's office for persons with disabilities, people with disabilities, and they are doing a lot of work around digital accessibility, and I have been in touch with them, and there's a lot of kind of learning from each other that happens there. So it is definitely something that's also happening in our local city government.
I went to this intensive course with Shannon called DANT, which is the Disability Arts New York Task Force. And we talked to a lot of city officials, and it was really interesting to see, just the different ways they think about things. I think disability arts and the civic engagement side of things, they sometimes overlap a little bit, but sometimes they're very distinctly different. And in the ways that they overlap, I don't know if I can talk about this, Jay, but the registry? Can I? Fine. Okay, tentative registry. We're building a registry that's we're still figuring out if this is something we should do. But we're building a registry for disabled artists in New York City. And we're still figuring out, what are the implications of what that means. How this could also be a resource, but also be something that could, target people further. So.
We have another question
LaJuné, I'm wondering if you foresee your work ever entering the artificial intelligence space, in that what I see you doing is building a lot of data that doesn't already exist in a certain space, and that's a lot of what is the issue in artificial intelligence programs being built without proper representation in their data. So I'm wondering if you've already thought about what your involvement would be in that. Stuff related.
Yes, so I have. I've thought a lot about it. Honestly, I'm not really tied to any medium per se, or really any specific mode of technology. What I'm really, interested in is how to do it the right way. like I've had like people reach out to me already, asking if like they could get access to the library for their AI, and I'm just like, first of all, who are you? Like, like you're DMing me, like this is weird. So, I mean, I've thought about it. I think that one of my major questions just within my art in general has been, how do we like really digest and deconstruct these technologies as they are, and, really think about how all of these, oppressive systems are already built within these spaces. It's not just, the people making the AI, but it's like even the idea of like, oh, let's make an artificial intelligence. Like, where does that idea even come from? So I'm really trying to like peel back, like, how do we like, go back to like, how do we like, push forward and keep going towards the future, while also peeling back, all of the different, like, just historical, just all of this, like, history, like, within these tools. How do we dive into that to make sure that we don't make the same mistakes of the past? So, yeah, I think that in terms of AI, like, I've been thinking about how to, I guess like create different artificial intelligence, like using, I guess, movement. I know that there have been different dancers that have been doing that already. But I'm also really interested a lot with how these technologies, like our communication with these technologies, and how, and also like the points in which these technologies break and why. So, yeah, I think that, like, in terms of artificial intelligence, yeah, I've been interested with it, but I don't know if that's helpful. Yeah.
Another question back here.
I'll stand up for this. I just want to say thank you all for sharing your practices, your viewpoints, how things change. A question for all of you is, what does the concept of intellectual property means for each of your practices? Like LaJuné, I feel like intellectual property, ownership of dances, of movements, of stories is very present in yours. Honestly, different layers of intellectual property or ownership of marginalized, quote unquote, voices are prominent throughout all of y'all's work. So I'm curious to know, like, what does intellectual property mean for each of you? Have each of you thought about law, this concept of copywriting, this concept of making sure your work is not stolen from another person who has, quote unquote, more resources or more, capital, if that makes sense. I just think that there's this common thread of intellectual origin, and what does that mean for each of you?
Okay, so for me, I think like going back to the Fortnite lawsuits and how they were dropped. So I think the huge part about the Fortnite lawsuits was the fact that they were dropped because those movements were not considered choreography. So the idea that, these movements that when you see them, you know that that is the Miller Rock, you know that that is the Carlton, like you know that these dances have an origin, and yet there's no law to protect it. Like, that really, strikes a chord with me. I think that that's why I decided to, I guess, expand more, like within the space that I was given. I think that even within the existing motion capture libraries, you don't know who was the person who wore the motion capture suit to create that movement. So basically that just like erases the whole origin for how that movement got into the library. And so let's say I have, Black characters, in my extended reality project, and I'm using these resources, but I don't know the origins for where these movements came from. I could be using movements from someone I actually don't want to be in my piece. So I think that for me, it's like, how do you build spaces and how do you build tools that actually fully capture the fullness of, what something is. And that's why, I guess in this case with recording Black movements, for me, I look at that as a very broad thing. For me, that's why I'm also, capturing the stories of the people who are making those specific movements. That's why I'm also creating a space to archive, conversations with people who are talking about this. Mainly because, even if someone was to steal, I guess, movements from this library and to put in their piece, there will always be, a space that says, this person did this date, this is their story, this is, how they did it, this is where we did it, basically for me, how do I explore, different places to get motion capture data as well, as opposed to just a motion capture studio, but, having a place that says here's all the information, this is the fullness of what this is, I think is very important. I have been thinking about, how to do it in terms of law, but I'm not even, I am definitely open to talking to lawyers, and I definitely do want to talk to lawyers because I think that that's important. But I do feel that that's going to be a longer fight, a longer journey. So.
Anybody else? Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm right here.
Hi. Okay, so intellectual property is a very complicated concept for us for many reasons. The first is you have to think about time. The reason why I say time is because right now we are in a space where it's like the .com boom, and the content that we have, you need a specific skill set to create it. It's not like you have, back in the day, you needed a specific skill set to make a website, now you got Squarespace, everyone can do it, right? So time is a really important factor because over time, it would be great if we can develop tools so that other communities can also use and develop their own public artwork in different ways. But then in terms of intellectual property, it's does that belong to the people? Do we create community guidelines so there's not swastikas everywhere, right? What does that look like and who owns that IP is a big question of I hope we have that problem in the future. But in terms of where we are at right now with the specific content, the name of the game is freemium. So for those of you who are familiar with the Spotify model, for example, it's you listen to some songs and some commercials, it's pay me for the whole thing. So what we're considering is look, public art, it should be for everyone, right? It would be so grimy if we just went to Black communities and we're yo, pay us to see this because you need to see this. That's not cool, right? But what we could do is engage in a freemium model where we can unlock some of our content in the catalog, donate that to either community organizations or run the demonstrations ourselves depending on power dynamics, interest, respect of space, all of that, right? Part one. But part two, let's say Cleveland, right? If Cleveland wants 20 statues, then we're talking about a city contract, right? We engage with the municipal government of Cleveland, and then we figure out terms, and ideally that becomes public art for Cleveland, but we get paid for our work, right? And so there are different gradients to that, and there are different approaches that we still have to discuss, and we're figuring it out. So just in simple terms, first thing is time, because the tools will change, and people are gonna do crazy things with technology. But the second thing is figuring out where it's if Coca-Cola wants to do a team building workshop with these AR monuments, and they wanna write a 5-figure check, you go take a check, you do this. I will probably take a check. And so So yeah, we'll talk about that later. I guess. Yeah, but like there are different dynamics depends on who it's for and why and all of that. Because all this work is literally about power, and we would be hypocrites if we were to become the oppressors ourselves and flip the script of the power dynamic.
I think what came up for me with your question is just that I don't really feel a sense of ownership over the idea of alt text as poetry. Something that we talk about a lot in the workshops is this idea that this project really exists in an ecosystem of work around this topic, and that like disabled people have been asking like specifically for creative approaches to description for a long time and creative approaches to access for forever. And so I think we have taken a very loose kind of sense of ownership over it. I think that's also like a lot of the places that we have been working is kind of with artist communities, with social justice organizations, and I think there is, with images on the internet, there is kind of this numbers game going on where there's so many images, and I think we feel really excited about this information being able to travel and reach different people, and so we're planning to release the workbook as an open source tool. But I have been thinking a lot about how to kind of put some kind of like non-commercial protections around that, and also just the ways that I think something that I want to be really careful about is that sometimes people get really excited about the kind of potential and the complexity and interesting aspects of image description, but outside of a connection to access, and that they're kind of like want to like run with it instead of kind of focusing on really who that needs to be for and what to be working towards. And so figuring out how to make sure that that's like really clear in the resources in terms of like how we want the resource used.
So I think we'll just take one more question, and then we encourage you all afterwards to join us for some wine and just chat. Everyone will be hanging out to continue the conversation, but first,
so this is a question for Shannon. Sorry, this might be like a stupid question, but maybe some other people are like me wondering if I wanted upload a photo through Instagram and describe it with alt text.
Yeah.
Is it in the comment?
Yeah. So
But there's a part 2.
Oh.
And then after that, when is your workbook going to be available?
Okay. So this is a huge problem with the platforms, is that adding alt text is not integrated into the workflow in an intuitive or obvious way. Instagram didn't have alt text until December 2018, so it's pretty recent. As you're uploading a photo, on the kind of screen where you're entering the caption, if you scroll all the way down, there's this tiny gray text that says advanced settings. And when you click on that, you're then able to enter the alt text. And actually, Twitter is even worse. Twitter has had alt text since 2016, but in order to write it, you had to go into your own account accessibility settings and opt in to even have the field appear in your workflow. So that's definitely a huge issue, is just like getting more buy-in from these platforms around the importance of this feature and surfacing that in a way that is like educating people about how to do this, rather than like really tucking it in away in a place that kind of makes it feel like it's not at all important. And then the workbook is it's really getting close. There was a dream that it was going to be ready by this week, but I think that it will be before the end of November. The online version will be released, and then we're exploring doing a print version, and I think that will likely take a little bit longer, but coming very, very soon.
So I just want to address the first question. I think your name started with the R, the yellow. What's your name?
Rad.
What's up, Rad?
No.
Okay, word. Yeah. I didn't properly answer your question, and I want to give you a good answer. Okay, so it's back to the question as far as dealing with civic actors in different ways, right? So like, there was, in August 2017, right after Charlottesville, we had a meeting with a powerful media executive who knows the mayor. And after the meeting, the understanding was that we were going to be a part of an exploratory committee that determines what statues go up or what goes down. We're going to create that process. Really excited. Less than 24 hours later, the mayor releases a tweet saying that this was going to happen. We're still waiting for our call. And so the reason why I'm saying this is because, especially, like, I gotta wear a jacket with the dreadlocks for them to take this seriously. It's not a joke. You feel me? And so it's not easy when you're writing grant applications and you're hungry before IB. And you can't even tell that authentic story because no one will believe you. We saw there were South Park episodes on it, and it was all over the news. That makes you think you're losing your sanity a little bit. But the reason why I'm saying this is because, aesthetics is one thing, but what we're doing is about power. And power does not play fair when it's threatened. And so I just wanted to do your actual question justice and tell you the truth.
But they got the money for the shed.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for adding my fun. Well, this is the last week of this cohort at Eyebeam, which is completely blowing my mind. Once you're in the Eyebeam family, you're always in the Eyebeam family. So, make sure you're following us on social media. Maddie over there has got you with all of the content. And following our newsletters as well, because we're really trying to continue to tell the stories of everyone, all of the incredible artists that we work with through the years. And we also just announced our incoming 2020 cohort. There's lots of ways to engage with Eyebeam. If you want to learn more, we'll be milling about the bar for a while now. Just feel free to ask. And thanks again so much for making tonight really special to everyone. And most of all, to the 5 of you, let's have one more big round of applause.